Today, we're talking about a real and developing story involving the United States and Canada, as trade officials from both countries are preparing for new talks in Washington in the coming weeks. And this matters because the economic relationship between these two countries is one of the largest and most important in the world, with billions of dollars in goods and services crossing the border every single day. So when officials signal that new discussions are coming, it is not a small routine meeting, but something that could shape prices, jobs, supply chains, and investment decisions across North America, according to recent reporting from major international outlets like Reuters. U.S. and Canadian trade representatives have already held discussions and are now planning formal meetings to address ongoing trade issues under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, also known as USMCA, which replaced NAFTA and governs how trade operates between the two countries. And while the reports say the meetings will take place in the coming weeks rather than immediately, the fact that preparations are underway suggests that both governments see a need to address pressure points in the economic relationship, including concerns about tariffs, manufacturing competitiveness, supply chain security, and broader economic stability. Now, it's important to understand that these talks are happening at the official trade team level, meaning representatives from the U.S. administration and the Canadian government are leading the negotiations. But ultimately, any major decisions or agreements would reflect the positions and priorities of the U.S. President and the Canadian Prime Minister, because trade policy at this level always aligns with national leadership strategy. So even if the presidents are not sitting in the same room at this moment, their economic agendas are directly connected to what their trade teams negotiate. And this is especially significant because in recent months there have been tensions over tariffs, industrial policy, and reshoring efforts in the United States, which aim to bring manufacturing jobs back home, while Canada has been focused on protecting its own industries and ensuring fair access to the American market. And when you look at the scale of the economic partnership, with the U.S. being Canada's largest trading partner and Canada being one of America's top partners as well, even small adjustments in trade rules can ripple through industries like automotive manufacturing, agriculture, energy, steel, technology, and transportation. So these upcoming talks are not just diplomatic routine, but potentially a reset or recalibration of economic cooperation between the two nations. And what makes this story relevant today is that global economic uncertainty, geopolitical tensions, and shifting supply chain strategies are forcing close allies like the United States and Canada to constantly reassess how they work together, especially in areas tied to national security, energy independence, and advanced manufacturing. So in this video, we're focusing strictly on what has been confirmed by credible news sources, which is that preparations for formal discussions are underway, and officials have acknowledged that trade issues will be addressed in Washington soon. And we are not speculating beyond what has been reported, because staying factual and analytical is important not only for credibility, but also to ensure compliance with platform policies. And as this story develops, we will likely see clearer signals about whether the talks aim to reduce tensions, adjust tariff frameworks, strengthen cooperation in key sectors, or negotiate specific industry protections. But for now, the key takeaway is simple and clear. Real, verified reporting confirms that U.S. and Canadian trade teams are preparing for new discussions in Washington. And given the size of the economic relationship between the two countries, this is a development worth watching closely because it could influence everything from cross-border investment to consumer prices in both nations. Now let's go deeper into why these upcoming trade talks between the United States and Canada are happening at this particular moment and what pressures are driving both governments toward the negotiating table, because trade discussions do not happen in isolation. They usually follow economic friction, policy shifts, or strategic recalculations. And in this case, several factors appear to be influencing the timing. First, there is the broader issue of tariffs and industrial policy in the United States, where recent economic strategies have emphasized strengthening domestic manufacturing, protecting key industries, and reshoring supply chains, especially in sectors like automotive production, steel, clean energy technology, and semiconductors. And when the U.S. moves to support or protect its industries through subsidies, regulatory changes, or tariff mechanisms, those policies can directly affect Canadian exporters who rely heavily on access to the American market. At the same time, Canada has been working to safeguard its own industries, particularly automotive manufacturing in Ontario, energy exports such as oil and natural gas, and agricultural products, all of which are deeply connected to cross-border trade flows. So when either side adjusts its economic strategy, it often creates negotiation pressure under the framework of the USMCA agreement, which is designed to manage disputes and maintain fair trade standards between the countries. Second, there is the issue of supply chain security, which has become a major priority since global disruptions in recent years exposed vulnerabilities in critical sectors. Both Washington and Ottawa are increasingly focused on securing supply chains for strategic materials, including minerals used in electric vehicle batteries and advanced technology production. And because Canada holds significant reserves of critical minerals, while the United States has major manufacturing capacity, cooperation and coordination are essential, meaning these talks may not only be about resolving disagreements, but also about aligning strategies for economic resilience. Third, there is the broader geopolitical environment, where global tensions and economic competition are pushing allied nations to strengthen partnerships, and for the United States and Canada, maintaining a stable and predictable trade relationship sends a strong signal to global markets, investors, and competitors that North America remains economically unified. And this matters because uncertainty between close trading partners can affect currency markets, business investment decisions, and even employment forecasts. Now, it is also important to clarify what has been officially reported so far. Credible outlets like Reuters have confirmed that trade officials from both countries have communicated and are preparing for meetings in Washington in the coming weeks, but they have not reported a finalized agreement or a confirmed in-person summit between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada at this stage. So as analysts, we must separate confirmed facts from assumptions. The confirmed fact is that preparatory work for discussions is underway. The interpretation is that both governments see enough importance in the issues to elevate them to formal talks. And that alone indicates that trade tensions or strategic adjustments require attention from a practical perspective for every day. Citizens, this matters because trade policy directly influences prices on imported goods, vehicle manufacturing costs, food exports, fuel distribution, and cross-border employment opportunities. So even though trade negotiations may sound technical or distant, their impact can reach consumers and workers quickly. And finally, there is the political dimension. Trade policy often reflects the broader economic vision of national leadership, whether that means prioritizing domestic job growth, strengthening alliances, or protecting certain industries. And while the trade teams handle the technical negotiations, their mandates ultimately align with the leadership goals of both governments, which means the direction of these talks will likely mirror larger economic strategies in Washington and Ottawa. So in summary, the reason these talks are happening now appears to be a combination of industrial policy shifts, tariff concerns, supply chain security priorities, geopolitical alignment, air and economic stability considerations. And understanding these drivers helps us see that this is not just a routine meeting, but part of a larger economic strategy unfolding between two of the world's closest trading partners. Now let's focus on what could realistically come out of these upcoming trade discussions between the United States and Canada, and what scenarios are being closely watched by analysts and businesses on both sides of the border. Because whenever two major economic partners prepare for talks, the outcome can range from minor technical adjustments to broader strategic shifts. And at this stage, no final decisions have been announced. But based on the structure of the USMCA agreement and the issues currently shaping North American trade, there are several key areas where movement could occur. The first possible outcome is clarification or adjustment around tariffs and trade enforcement mechanisms, especially if either side believes that certain policies are creating unfair advantages or harming domestic industries. Under USMCA, there are formal dispute resolution channels, and sometimes talks begin as a way to prevent disputes from escalating into formal trade challenges. So one scenario is that these meetings aim to ease tensions before they turn into larger conflicts. The second possible development could involve deeper coordination in strategic industries such as electric vehicles, battery production, and critical minerals, because both the United States and Canada are investing heavily in clean energy transitions and advanced manufacturing, and aligning incentives, tax credits, or sourcing requirements can help avoid competitive friction between the two countries. For example, if one country introduces subsidies that unintentionally disadvantage companies in the other, negotiations may be necessary to rebalance the framework while maintaining partnership goals. The third potential area of discussion is supply chain resilience, particularly in sectors that are considered essential for national security and economic stability. Recent global disruptions have made both governments more cautious about overdependence on distant markets, and strengthening North American supply chains is often presented as a shared objective, meaning these talks could reinforce cooperation rather than confrontation. Another area that businesses will be watching closely is agriculture, because cross-border agricultural trade has historically been sensitive, involving issues such as dairy access, grain exports, and food safety standards. Even small regulatory differences can lead to disputes, so trade teams may use these meetings to address outstanding concerns before they affect farmers and exporters. It is also possible that the talks serve primarily as a strategic reset, meaning both sides want to publicly demonstrate that communication channels remain open and that economic disagreements can be managed through dialogue rather than escalation, and that in itself can stabilize markets because investors and companies prefer predictable policy environments. Now, it is important to repeat that, as of the latest verified reporting, there is no confirmed announcement of a finalized deal or a signed agreement, and there is no official confirmation of a joint presidential summit tied directly to these talks at this moment. What is confirmed is that officials are preparing for discussions in Washington and that trade matters are on the agenda. So when presenting this story, it is critical to clearly separate confirmed reporting from possible outcomes, because speculation presented as fact can damage credibility and potentially create misinformation risks, especially on platforms that value responsible reporting. So the responsible way to frame this is to explain that discussions are planned, outline the key areas where changes could happen based on current economic realities, and emphasize that negotiations often take time and involve multiple rounds before any public agreement is reached. And from a viewer perspective, the reason this matters is that any shift in trade rules between the United States and Canada can affect manufacturing jobs, cross-border investments, consumer prices, and long-term economic growth strategies. So even though we are in the early phase of this development, the direction these talks take could influence the broader North American economy. And that is why businesses, policymakers, and market analysts are paying close attention to what happens next. As we conclude this analysis, the most important thing to understand is that these upcoming trade talks between the United States and Canada represent a moment of strategic positioning rather than a finalized breakthrough. And that distinction matters because responsible reporting requires us to focus on what has been officially confirmed, which is that trade officials from both countries are preparing for discussions in Washington in the coming weeks, while the specific outcomes remain open and subject to negotiation. And when two of the world's closest economic partners enter talks, the broader message is often just as important as the technical details, because steady communication between Washington and Ottawa signals stability to markets, businesses, and global observers who rely on predictability in North American trade policy. Now, from a leadership perspective, any direction these talks take will ultimately reflect the economic priorities of the U.S. President and the Canadian Prime Minister, since trade teams operate under their administration's strategic goals, whether those goals emphasize domestic job growth, industrial competitiveness, energy security, or cross-border cooperation. And while there is currently no official confirmation of a joint summit tied directly to this round of discussions, the political alignment between both governments will shape the negotiating space in the background. And that is why analysts are watching not only the technical trade language, but also the broader policy signals coming from both capitals. Another key point to remember is that the U.S.-Canada trade relationship is deeply integrated, with supply chains that cross the border multiple times during production, especially in automotive manufacturing, agriculture, and energy, which means that even modest policy adjustments can have multiplied effects throughout the economy, influencing business costs, export competitiveness, and ultimately consumer prices. So when viewers ask why this matters, the answer is simple. Economic coordination between these two countries affects real jobs, real industries, and real households. At the same time, it is equally important not to overstate developments because negotiations often involve incremental progress rather than dramatic announcements, and responsible analysis means acknowledging uncertainty, explaining potential pathways, and avoiding predictions that are not grounded in verified reporting. As of now, what is confirmed is preparation for talks and acknowledgement from officials that trade matters are on the agenda. What is not confirmed is a specific agreement, a signed framework, or an emergency escalation. So the story at this stage is about preparation and positioning, not resolution. And that nuance is essential for maintaining credibility and compliance with platform standards that value factual commentary over speculation. Moving forward, the next indicators to watch will include official statements after meetings take place, signals about whether disputes are being resolved or escalated, and any public comments from senior leadership that clarify priorities, because those will provide stronger evidence of direction. Until then, the key takeaway is that renewed engagement between U.S. and Canadian trade teams reflects the importance of maintaining a stable and competitive North American economic partnership in a time of global uncertainty. And as this develops, we will continue focusing on verified updates, clear explanations, and measured analysis so that viewers understand both what is happening now and what could realistically come next without exaggeration or unnecessary speculation.